The rain came down like bullets that October night, hammering the sidewalk outside Chateau Noir, with the kind of fury that makes you believe the sky itself is angry. Sienna pressed her face against the glass window, watching couples laugh over wine that cost more than she'd earned in a month. Back when she had months, back when she had anything at all. Her stomach hadn't stopped screaming for 2 days, a constant reminder that hunger doesn't care about dignity or pride or the fact that she used to be somebody. That's when the door burst open like judgment itself. A woman stepped out, tall and draped in diamonds that caught the streetlight like tiny stars mocking the darkness. Victoria Ashford, billionaire Donovan Pierce's fiancée. Her face twisted with the kind of disgust people reserve for stepping in something foul. Her heels clicked against the wet pavement, each step deliberate, each step a declaration that this was her world and Sienna didn't belong in it. "You!" Victoria spat, her voice sharp enough to draw blood. "Move! Now!" Sienna stumbled backward, her worn sneakers slipping on the slick concrete. Her torn jacket caught on the door handle, ripping further with a sound that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. The tearing fabric made Victoria smile, and that smile was worse than any words she could have spoken. It was the smile of someone who enjoyed watching things break. "Filth like you ruins the atmosphere," Victoria said loud enough for everyone inside to hear through the open door. Her voice carried like she wanted an audience for this particular cruelty. "Do you know how much my fiancé paid for our table tonight? And you're out here looking like that, like some kind of warning about what happens when people don't try hard enough?" Behind Victoria, her bridesmaids laughed, that high-pitched sound of women who've never known real hardship. One of them held up her phone filming because these days cruelty isn't real unless it's documented, unless it can be shared and laughed about later over mimosas and avocado toast. Sienna's throat tightened around words that wouldn't come. "I'm just what?" Victoria stepped closer and her perfume hit Sienna like a physical thing, expensive and suffocating, the kind of scent that costs more than rent. "Just ruining a nice evening for decent people. Just reminding us that some people are born to lose, that some people will never amount to anything no matter how many chances they get." She shoved Sienna backward. Not hard enough to make her fall, but hard enough to make the point crystal clear. Hard enough to establish the hierarchy. Hard enough to remind Sienna that in this world, in this moment, she was nothing but an obstacle to be removed. Sienna's hands hit the wet pavement. The cold soaked through immediately, seeping into her bones like it had been waiting for this moment. Like even the weather knew she didn't matter anymore. "That's better," Victoria said, turning back toward the warmth and light of the restaurant. "Stay down there. It suits you. Maybe you'll learn that this is where you belong." The door closed behind her, swallowing the laughter and the warmth, leaving Sienna alone in the rain with nothing but the sound of her own breathing and the distant rumble of thunder that sounded like the world clearing its throat before forgetting she existed. But across the street, behind the tinted windows of a midnight blue Rolls-Royce that cost more than most people's houses, someone was watching. Donovan Pierce sat perfectly still, his hand frozen halfway to the door handle. His driver waited for instructions that weren't coming. But Donovan's eyes stayed locked on the girl in the torn jacket sitting in the rain, too tired to even cry. too exhausted to rage against the injustice of it all. His mother's voice echoed in his mind like it always did in moments that mattered. Words she'd said 2 weeks before cancer finally took her, when she knew her time was measured in days and wanted to make sure her son understood what really mattered in this world. "Baby," she'd whispered, her hand trembling in his. "When I'm gone, you're going to have money people would kill for. More money than sense sometimes, but that money will make you a target for folks who see dollar signs instead of a human being. You need to test every person who claims to love you. Every single one, because character reveals itself in how we treat the invisible ones, the people who can't do nothing for us, the people society has decided don't matter. That's where you see someone's soul." Donovan picked up his phone, his jaw tight with the kind of anger that comes from finally seeing clearly. "Cancel the rehearsal dinner," he said quietly, his voice steady despite the storm building in his chest. "And find out everything about that girl, everything. Where she came from. How she ended up here. I want to know her story before sunrise." His investigator didn't ask questions. He'd worked for the Pierce family long enough to know that tone meant something had shifted, that the game had changed, that someone was about to learn a very expensive lesson about underestimating a man who'd built an empire from nothing. Sienna hadn't always been invisible. 3 years earlier, she'd been a college student with a future that stretched out before her like an open road. Pre-med, Dean's List every semester. A mother who believed in her so fiercely it hurt sometimes, who worked double shifts at the hospital just to make sure her daughter had everything she needed to succeed. They had dreams, the two of them. Dreams of white coats and stethoscopes and a life where they'd never have to worry about bills piling up or phone calls from debt collectors. But then her mother got sick. Stage 4, the kind of diagnosis that doesn't negotiate or compromise or care about your dreams. The kind that comes with a timeline and a list of impossibly expensive treatments that insurance companies find creative ways not to cover. Sienna dropped out without hesitation, moved home, worked 3 jobs that kept her moving from dawn until long past midnight. She cleaned offices before the sun came up, scrubbing toilets and emptying trash cans while the city still slept. She served lunch shifts at a diner where men twice her age thought tips gave them permission to say things that made her skin crawl. She stocked shelves at night in a 24-hour pharmacy, her hands moving on autopilot while her mind stayed with her mother in that hospital room that smelled like disinfectant and defeat. Every dollar went to treatment, co-pays and experimental drugs that came with promises but no guarantees. Clinical trials that offered hope measured in percentages that kept getting smaller. Her mother lasted 18 months fighting every single day, holding on because she didn't want to leave her daughter alone in this world. Sienna held her hand when she took her last breath, whispered "I love you" into hair that had fallen out and grown back thin and gray. Then walked out of that hospice room into a world that didn't pause its cruelty just because her heart had shattered into pieces too small to count. The bills came anyway. Medical debt doesn't mourn or offer condolences or care that you just lost the only person who ever loved you unconditionally. Within 4 months, Sienna lost the apartment. Her mother's life insurance barely covered the funeral, leaving nothing for the mountain of debt that had accumulated like snow in a storm. Friends from college stopped answering her calls because grief makes people uncomfortable and poverty makes them disappear entirely. Nobody wants to be reminded that it could happen to them, that we're all just a few disasters away from losing everything. She ended up on the streets with a duffel bag and her mother's Bible, the one with notes in the margins and underlined passages about faith and perseverance. She slept in doorways and under bridges, learning which neighborhoods had cops who looked the other way and which ones had cops who took pleasure in moving people along like trash that hadn't been collected yet. But Sienna refused to break. She never stole, even when hunger made her hands shake and her vision blur. Never begged aggressively or harassed people for change. When she found half a sandwich in a park, left on a bench by someone who'd gotten full, she split it with an elderly man who had less than her. When she earned $5 holding a sign at an intersection, she bought socks for a young mother whose baby's feet were freezing in the November cold. People walked past her like she was furniture, like she was part of the landscape, as permanent and invisible as fire hydrants or mailboxes. But she never stopped being human, never stopped seeing others the way she wished they would see her. That night outside Chateau Noir wasn't the first time Victoria Ashford had been cruel. It wasn't even close. 2 weeks earlier, Donovan had taken her to brunch at the same restaurant, trying to convince himself that the doubt growing in his chest was just cold feet. Just normal pre-wedding anxiety that everyone experiences. A waitress, a young woman working her way through nursing school with dreams that reminded Donovan of his own mother, spilled coffee on Victoria's purse. An accident, the kind that happens 100 times a day in restaurants across the world. The girl apologized 6 times, her voice shaking, her eyes filling with tears as she dabbed at the leather with a napkin that only seemed to make things worse. Victoria demanded she be fired, not quietly, not with any dignity, but loud enough for the entire restaurant to hear. Called her clumsy trash and a waste of space, and said that people like her would never amount to anything because they couldn't even perform simple tasks without destroying other people's property. Made the girl cry in front of everyone, reduced her to sobs while other diners pretended not to notice, suddenly fascinated by their eggs Benedict. Donovan paid for the purse to be cleaned, tipped the waitress $500 and told her she was doing a good job, that accidents happen, that she shouldn't let anyone make her feel small. But something shifted in him that day, something fundamental and irreversible. He started watching Victoria differently, noticing things he'd trained himself to overlook. The way she spoke to service workers, the way she dismissed anyone she deemed beneath her. The way cruelty came so naturally to her that it seemed like breathing. The mask had cracked. And once you see the truth behind someone's performance, you can't unsee it no matter how hard you try. His mother's voice haunted him constantly now, repeating those words like a prayer or a warning or both. Character reveals itself in how we treat the invisible ones. And now, sitting in his car, watching Victoria shove a homeless girl into the rain like she was garbage to be discarded, Donovan finally saw the complete truth in high definition. He'd been engaged to a monster. and he'd been too blind or too hopeful or too desperate to believe in love to see it until now. By morning, Donovan knew everything. His private investigator was the best money could buy, a former FBI agent who'd traded government work for private sector paychecks and never looked back. Within 12 hours, he had Sienna's full story assembled like pieces of a puzzle that told a tragedy in documents and photos. The dead mother, the medical debt that would take 3 lifetimes to pay off, the eviction, the job she'd worked until her body gave out. The investigator also found something else, something that made Donovan's chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't quite name. Sienna used to volunteer at the hospital where her mother died. Even after losing everything, even after the world had taken away her future and her home and her hope, she'd returned once a week to read to terminal patients. She'd sit with dying strangers and read them poetry and stories, offering them the same comfort someone had once offered her mother. She did this until she couldn't afford the bus fare anymore, until even that small kindness became a luxury she couldn't maintain. This girl, the investigator said, sliding the file across Donovan's desk with the care of someone handling evidence, is exactly what she looks like. No cons, no schemes, no hidden agenda, just bad luck and a heart too big for the world she ended up in. If you're looking for dirt, you won't find any. If you're looking for proof that good people still exist, well, you're holding it. Donovan stared at Sienna's ID photo taken before everything fell apart. She looked so young in it, so full of hope and possibility. Her smile was genuine, the kind you can't fake, the kind that comes from believing the universe is fundamentally good and things will work out if you just try hard enough. And Victoria? Donovan asked quietly. Already knowing the answer would be bad, but not knowing exactly how bad. The investigator's expression darkened like storm clouds rolling in. He'd seen a lot in his career, investigated everyone from mob bosses to corporate criminals, but something about this case had gotten under his skin. You're not gonna like it. In fact, you're going to want to throw something, maybe several somethings. I'd recommend starting with that ugly vase your ex-fiancée insisted you buy. Victoria wasn't just cruel, she was calculated. Strategic, a predator who'd studied her prey and knew exactly where to bite for maximum profit. The investigator uncovered 2 previous engagements, both to wealthy black men, both successful entrepreneurs who'd built their fortunes through hard work and innovation. Both engagements had ended abruptly right after large financial settlements that Victoria's lawyer had negotiated with the precision of a surgeon removing organs. One man, a hotel magnate in Chicago named Sterling, who'd built a chain of luxury properties in underserved black neighborhoods, paid her $3 million to go away quietly after she threatened to claim abuse. There was no abuse, just fabricated evidence and a lawyer who specialized in extraction. Victoria had hired an acting coach to teach her how to cry on command, how to tremble just right, how to perform trauma for maximum effect. The second man, a real estate developer in Atlanta named Crawford, who'd made his fortune renovating historic buildings, gave her $1.8 million in a penthouse to avoid scandal before his IPO. Victoria had threatened to go public with claims that would have tanked his company's valuation, cost him everything he'd built. Never mind that the claims were fiction, never mind that she'd manufactured evidence and coached witnesses. She wasn't even looking for companionship. She was running a con, a long game that required patience and performance and the ability to see people as nothing more than bank accounts with heartbeats. And Donovan Pierce, worth $400 million, controlling interest in a dozen companies' real estate holdings across 3 states, was her biggest score yet. Her retirement plan, her masterpiece. But it got worse because it always gets worse when you start pulling threads. The investigator pulled up Victoria's text messages with her mother, Carol Ashford, a woman who'd taught her daughter that morality was for people who couldn't afford better options. The messages read like a criminal conspiracy spelled out in emojis and casual cruelty. Victoria had written, "This one's dumb enough to marry me without a real prenup. His lawyer's a joke. Old family friend who probably hasn't updated his contract templates since the 90s. I could drive a truck through the loopholes." Carol responded, how much are we taking? Give me a number. I want to know what kind of villa we're buying. Victoria answered, "Everything, the estate, the foundation accounts, offshore transfers. I've already got the accounts set up in Grand Cayman. Give it 18 months before I'm bored and file for divorce. Then we disappear and live like queens for the rest of our lives." Carol sent back, "What about that homeless girl from last night? The one you shoved?" Victoria replied, "What about her? She's nobody, probably dead by winter anyway. Natural selection doing its job. The weak don't survive, and that's how it should be." Donovan's hands shook as he read, his vision blurring with rage so pure it felt like poison in his bloodstream. Victoria hadn't just been cruel to Sienna for fun or because she was having a bad day. She'd been testing her own power, proving to herself that she could destroy someone without consequence, that the world would let her get away with it because she had money and connections and the kind of confidence that comes from never being held accountable for anything. Victoria's charity foundation, the one Donovan had funded with $12 million of his family's money, the one his mother had been so proud of before she died, was a shell, a performance piece, an elaborate lie dressed up with galas and speeches and photo opportunities with politicians who needed to look compassionate during election season. The investigator traced the accounts with the skill of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Money meant for homeless shelters, job training programs, mental health services, addiction treatment, all of it funneled into offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. Victoria bought a villa in Tuscany with donated funds, a yacht she named Blessed Life with money meant for battered women's shelters, designer clothes she wore once and discarded, each outfit costing more than it would take to house a family for months. She threw galas where she gave speeches about compassion and systemic change and the importance of giving back. Donors wrote checks. Journalists praised her. Politicians took photos with her. And every dollar vanished into her pockets like water down a drain. Donovan felt physically sick, his stomach churning with the kind of nausea that comes from realizing you've been played. He'd believed in her, introduced her to his family, his business partners, his late mother's closest friends, let her into his home, his bed, his life. Let her speak at his mother's funeral, where she'd cried perfect tears and said beautiful things about legacy and carrying on the work of uplifting the community. And she'd been robbing him blind the entire time, laughing about it in text messages with her mother, treating his family's legacy like a piggy bank she could smash whenever she wanted. The worst part, the part that made Donovan want to put his fist through something expensive, was that people knew. Not everything, but enough. Enough to have said something if they'd cared more about justice than convenience. Antonio, the owner of Chateau Noir, had seen Victoria humiliate staff members before, witnessed her reduce a busboy to tears for bringing the wrong brand of sparkling water, watched her shove Sienna into the rain like trash. But when Donovan's investigator interviewed him, Antonio wouldn't go on record, claimed he didn't remember details, said he couldn't be sure what he'd seen. "She's too connected," Antonio admitted nervously, his eyes darting around like Victoria might materialize from the shadows. "Her family donates to the mayor's campaigns, big donations, the kind that get you personal phone calls and dinner invitations. I can't afford to make enemies like that. I've got a business to run, employees who depend on me. I've got too much to lose." The bridesmaids who laughed that night outside the restaurant. They were Victoria's sorority sisters from Spelman, women who'd watched her run the same scam in college. They'd seen her target wealthy fraternity boys from Morehouse and Clark, Atlanta, extracting loans she never repaid, crying assault when anyone pushed back. They knew exactly who she was, had probably helped her refine the technique over bottles of wine and late-night strategy sessions. But they stayed quiet because Victoria had leverage on all of them, knew their secrets, had copies of texts and photos that could ruin reputations and marriages. Even the wedding planner, a elegant woman named Lorraine who'd organized ceremonies for half the black elite in 3 states, had suspicions but stayed silent. Victoria's reputation for retaliation was well known in certain circles. Cross her and she'd destroy your business with bad reviews and whisper campaigns. She'd call your clients and plant doubts. She'd make sure you never worked in this city again. The community that praised her charity work? Silent. The church that agreed to host the wedding, a historic congregation that his mother had attended for 40 years? Silent. The nonprofit board she sat on? Silent. Everyone protected Victoria because she had power, connections, and the ability to destroy reputations with a single phone call to the right person. She'd weaponized the community's desire to protect successful black women, used it as a shield for behavior that would have gotten anyone else canceled 6 times over. But Donovan wasn't everyone, and he'd just inherited his mother's entire fortune, including the receipts, the offshore account numbers, the recorded phone calls that proved everything. His mother had been meticulous about documentation, had kept records of every donation, every transfer, every conversation. She'd trusted Victoria, but she'd verified everything anyway, because that's what growing up poor teaches you. You hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. That's when Donovan made his decision, his jaw setting with the kind of determination that had built his empire in the first place. Victoria wanted a $10 million wedding? She'd get one. Every detail she demanded, every expensive flower arrangement and custom menu item and designer dress fitting. But it would be the last performance of her life, the final act in a play she didn't know she was starring in. The rehearsal dinner took place at the Pierce family estate, a historic property that had been in the family for 3 generations. Built by his great-grandfather with money earned through back-breaking work that Donovan never forgot. The house sat on 15 acres of manicured grounds, all columns and history and the kind of grandeur that whispered old money even though the Pierces had fought for every dollar. 200 guests, a string quartet playing Vivaldi, champagne towers that cost more than most people's cars, each bottle carefully selected by a sommelier. Victoria had insisted they fly in from France. Ice sculptures shaped like swans, tables set with china that had survived the civil rights era, and every family celebration since. Flowers everywhere, white roses and orchids, filling the air with perfume that competed with expensive cologne and designer fragrances. Victoria wore a custom Vera Wang gown for the rehearsal dinner alone. White lace that had required 6 fittings and countless alterations. Off the shoulder with a train that required 2 assistants to manage whenever she moved. She looked like a queen surveying her kingdom, and in her mind, that's exactly what she was. This was her coronation, her moment of triumph. The night before, she'd legally bind herself to $400 million and start the 18-month countdown to her exit strategy. She felt invincible, untouchable. She'd gotten away with everything, and tomorrow she'd walk down an aisle toward the biggest payday of her life. Donovan stood at the head table, microphone in hand, his tuxedo custom-tailored and sharp enough to cut glass. He smiled, and to everyone watching it looked genuine, warm. The smile of a man in love about to marry the woman of his dreams. "Thank you all for being here," he began, his voice carrying across the room with the easy confidence of someone used to commanding attention. "I wanted to take a moment to honor the woman I'm about to marry. To really talk about who Victoria is when nobody's watching." Victoria beamed, her smile so bright it could have powered the chandeliers. Her mother dabbed at fake tears with a handkerchief, performing grief at losing her daughter to marriage even though they'd both be richer by this time next year. The bridesmaids sighed romantically. Guests pulled out their phones to record this touching moment. "Victoria has taught me so much about character," Donovan continued, his voice still warm but something changing in his eyes that only someone who really knew him would catch. "About who people really are when they think no one's watching. About what matters when you strip away the performance and the pretty words and all the things we tell ourselves to sleep at night." The room murmured approval. Someone said amen. Someone else whistled. Donovan pressed a button on his phone. The projection screen behind him, massive and impossible to miss, flickered to life. Audio played through speakers positioned around the room. Crystal clear, professional quality, the kind of sound reproduction that doesn't allow for any misunderstanding. Victoria's voice filled the space, confident and cruel. "This one's dumb enough to marry me without a real prenup. His lawyer's a joke." Carol's voice answered, "How much are we taking?" Victoria again laughing. "Everything. The estate, the foundation accounts, offshore transfers. Give it 18 months before I'm bored, then we disappear." The room went silent. Not the comfortable silence of people listening to a speech, but the shocked silence of people processing something they can't quite believe they're hearing. 200 people collectively held their breath. Victoria's face drained of color, her foundation suddenly too dark against skin that had gone gray. She stood, her chair scraping against the floor with a sound like a scream. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her hands shook so badly her champagne glass fell, shattering against the floor. Donovan, I can explain. She finally managed, her voice high and thin and desperate. Sit down, Donovan said quietly. His voice was ice. It cut through the room sharper than any shout could have. Sit down and watch what you've done. The screen changed. Bank statements, offshore accounts with balances that made people gasp. Villa purchases, yacht registrations, wire transfers with dates and amounts and destinations. A paper trail so clear even a child could follow it from point A to point Z. This, Donovan said, his voice steady despite the rage burning in his chest, is where the $12 million I donated to her charity actually went. 12 million my mother saved. 12 million meant for homeless shelters and job programs and mental health services. 12 million that was supposed to help people like the girl Victoria shoved into the rain 3 weeks ago outside Chateau Noir. Gasps rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat. Guests pulled out their phones, no longer recording a romantic moment but documenting a public execution. Filming, texting, posting to social media in real time. This was going to be everywhere by morning. TMZ, CNN, every gossip blog and news outlet. The fall of Victoria Ashford was going to be a national story. Victoria's mother tried to leave, standing abruptly and heading for the exit with her designer purse clutched like a shield. Security blocked the doors. 2 men in suits, former military, the kind who don't move when you try to push past them. Carol's face went white when she realized she wasn't leaving until Donovan said she could. You humiliated a homeless girl outside Chateau Noir 3 weeks ago, Donovan continued, clicking to another slide. You shoved her into the rain, called her filth, said she was ruining the atmosphere, and you know what she did after you left? Security footage appeared on the screen. Grainy but clear enough. Sienna, soaking wet, shivering in her torn jacket, pulling crumpled bills from her pocket. Approaching an elderly homeless man who looked even worse off than her, handing him money. The old man crying. Sienna hugging him even though they were both drenched and the rain showed no signs of stopping. That girl, Donovan said, his voice breaking slightly, the first crack in his composure, has more character in her torn jacket than you'll ever have in all your designer clothes combined. More humanity in her empty pockets than you've got in your offshore bank accounts. She lost everything and stayed kind. You had everything and chose cruelty. Victoria lunged at him, screaming incoherently, her careful mask shattered completely. She looked feral, desperate, her perfectly styled hair coming loose as she clawed toward him. Security caught her before she made it 3 steps. 2 men restraining her while she thrashed and screamed threats that would definitely be evidence in the upcoming trial. The wedding is canceled, Donovan announced, his voice returning to that cold, steady tone. Victoria Ashford and Carol Ashford are both under investigation for fraud, embezzlement, charity scam operations, and wire fraud across state lines. The district attorney has been notified and has assured me that charges will be filed first thing Monday morning. And every person she conned before me. Sterling from Chicago and Crawford from Atlanta. They're filing a class action lawsuit. You're going to spend the next decade in court, and whatever you don't lose to legal fees, you'll lose to restitution. He turned to Victoria, who was being restrained by 2 security guards, mascara running down her face in black rivers, her carefully applied makeup destroyed by tears and rage. She looked nothing like the poised woman who'd walked in an hour earlier. She looked like exactly what she was, a con artist whose luck had finally run out. "You wanted to take everything from me," Donovan said softly, stepping closer so only she could hear the next part. "You wanted to destroy my family's legacy. Steal what my great-grandparents built with their hands, what my mother protected with her last breath. But you made one fatal mistake." "What?" Victoria spat, her voice venomous. "What mistake? I was perfect. I had you completely fooled." "You underestimated the value of a good heart," Donovan said, his voice sad now more than angry. "You thought cruelty was strength. You thought stepping on people made you powerful. But all it did was show me exactly who you were. That girl you shoved? She saved you, because seeing how you treated her saved me from the biggest mistake of my life." Security escorted Victoria out, her screams echoing through the estate like a curse. The last thing the guests saw was her thrashing against the guards, her expensive dress tearing, her heels breaking as they dragged her toward the driveway where police were already waiting. Her mother was arrested at the gate, handcuffed in her St. John's suit, still clutching that designer purse like it might protect her from consequences. The fallout was nuclear, the kind of scandal that dominates news cycles for weeks. Within 48 hours, Victoria's face was on every news station, every gossip site, every social media feed. Her fake charity became a national scandal, the kind that makes politicians scramble to return donations and nonprofits tighten oversight. Donors demanded refunds. The IRS launched a criminal investigation. State attorneys general from multiple jurisdictions opened cases. The FBI got involved because of the wire fraud and interstate conspiracy. Her two previous victims, Sterling and Crawford, came forward publicly, holding a joint press conference where they detailed how Victoria had targeted successful black men specifically, weaponizing stereotypes about aggressive black masculinity to make her abuse claims seem credible. They filed lawsuits to recover their settlements plus damages. Other men came forward too, guys from college, entrepreneurs she'd scammed in smaller ways. The pattern was undeniable. Carol Ashford was charged as an accomplice, facing 15 years in federal prison. Both women were denied bail after prosecutors argued they were flight risks with access to offshore accounts. They sat in county jail while their lawyers tried to negotiate plea deals that would spare them the worst of the sentencing guidelines. Victoria's sorority sisters scrambled to delete old photos and posts, desperately trying to distance themselves from the scandal. Too late. Screenshots lived forever. Someone had archived everything. Their names came up in articles. Their own partners started asking uncomfortable questions about who they'd been friends with and what they'd known. Antonio, the restaurant owner, lost half his clientele within a month. People who'd witnessed his cowardice, his willingness to protect power instead of doing what was right, took their business elsewhere. His Yelp reviews tanked. Food critics who'd once praised him suddenly remembered mediocre meals. He eventually sold Chateau Noir at a significant loss and left the city, last heard managing a franchise restaurant in a suburb where nobody knew his name. But for Sienna, everything changed in ways she never could have imagined. Donovan found her 2 days after the rehearsal dinner, his investigator tracking her to a shelter where she'd been staying when the weather got too dangerous to sleep outside. She was helping in the kitchen when he arrived, chopping vegetables for soup, even though she was technically a guest, not staff. That's just who she was. He didn't offer charity, didn't sweep in like some savior in an expensive suit ready to rescue the poor girl and feel good about himself. He offered respect, recognition. The thing she'd been missing more than money or shelter or food. "I saw what you did that night," Donovan said, sitting across from her in the shelter's common room while other residents pretended not to listen. "After Victoria hurt you, after she humiliated you in front of everyone, you still gave your last few dollars to someone who needed it more. That's not weakness. That's not foolishness. That's strength. That's character. That's exactly the kind of person my mother would have loved." Sienna didn't know what to say. She'd been invisible for so long that being seen felt almost painful. Like muscles that had atrophied suddenly being asked to work again. "I'm not here to save you," Donovan continued, his voice gentle but firm. "You don't need saving. You've been saving yourself every single day just by refusing to let this world make you cruel. But I'd like to offer you a chance. My late mother ran a foundation, a real one that helped formerly homeless individuals get back on their feet. Housing assistance, job training, mental health support, medical care, everything I claim Victoria's fake charity was doing. I need someone to run it, someone who understands what it's like, someone who's lived it, someone I can trust because they've already proven who they are when nobody's watching." Sienna stared at him, tears streaming down her face, cutting tracks through dust she hadn't had the energy to wash off. "Why me? You don't know me. I could be anyone. I could disappoint you. Because you proved something Victoria never could," Donovan said softly, his own eyes wet now. "That goodness isn't about what you have. It's about what you do when you have nothing. When the world has taken everything and you've got every excuse to be bitter and angry and cruel, and you chose kindness anyway. That's who I want running my mother's legacy, someone she would have chosen herself." Sienna took the job, not because she needed rescue, but because she finally had the chance to do what she'd always wanted. Help people the way she wished someone had helped her. Within 6 months, she'd transformed the foundation from a well-meaning but inefficient organization into something that actually changed lives. She helped over 300 people find permanent housing, created job pipelines with local businesses willing to hire people with gaps in their employment history, opened a free medical clinic that didn't ask questions about insurance or immigration status, started a legal aid program to help people deal with the debt and criminal records that often came with homelessness. She worked 16-hour days, barely slept, poured everything she had into making sure nobody else felt as invisible as she'd felt that night in the rain. And somewhere in the long nights of working side by side with Donovan, somewhere between budget meetings and facility inspections and grant applications, something shifted between them. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about some romance novel fantasy of the billionaire and the homeless girl. It was about two people who'd both lost someone they loved, his mother and her mother, and found in each other a kind of quiet understanding. They'd both been tested by grief and loss, both been betrayed by people they trusted, both learned that character matters more than comfort. They started having dinner together after work, Nothing fancy, just takeout in the office while they planned the next expansion. They talked about their mothers, sharing stories that made them laugh and cry in equal measure. They argued about foundation strategy, both stubborn and passionate about doing things right. Slowly, carefully, they built something real on a foundation of mutual respect instead of the quicksand of infatuation. 1 year after the canceled wedding, Donovan and Sienna got married. Not at a lavish estate with 200 guests and ice sculptures and champagne towers, but in a small church with 20 people who actually mattered. Formerly homeless individuals Sienna had helped, now in stable housing with jobs and hope. Donovan's closest family members, the ones who'd known his mother and understood what she would have wanted. The elderly man Sienna had shared her sandwich with in the park, cleaned up now and living in foundation housing, walking her down the aisle because she had no father and he'd become the closest thing to family she had left. No designer gown, no $10 million budget, no performances for cameras or speeches for social media. Just two people who saw each other when the world had looked away, who chose each other not because of what they had, but because of who they were, who understood that love isn't about grand gestures, but about consistent kindness, about seeing someone fully and choosing them anyway. And Victoria? Last anyone heard, she was working a minimum wage job at a call center in Arizona after serving 38 months in federal prison. No villa, no yacht, no power, no connections who would return her calls. Her mother had flipped on her during the trial, testifying against her own daughter in exchange for a reduced sentence. That betrayal hurt worse than the prison time. The sorority sisters she'd partied with and schemed with had blocked her number. The men she'd conned had their money back plus interest. The charity donors had been made whole through restitution payments that would continue for the rest of her life. Just consequences, just karma wearing the face of justice. Just the universe balancing the scales the way it always does eventually, even if it takes longer than we'd like. Sometimes the universe tests the wealthy, and most people don't understand this until it's too late. The test isn't about how much gold you can accumulate or how many zeros you can add to your bank balance. It's about whether that gold corrupts your soul or clarifies it. Whether wealth makes you cruel or compassionate. Whether having everything makes you see others as human beings or as obstacles to be removed. Donovan Pierce could have married Victoria, could have ignored the red flags waving like surrender banners in a losing war. Could have convinced himself that the cruelty was just stress, just wedding planning anxiety, just something that would improve after they said their vows. He had enough money to absorb her betrayal and move on, to write off $12 million as the cost of a learning experience. Rich people do that kind of thing all the time, treating devastating losses like minor inconveniences because the money always comes back eventually. But he chose differently, because his mother taught him something most people never learn, something that can't be bought or downloaded or absorbed through osmosis. True character reveals itself in how we treat those who can do nothing for us. The people who can't advance our careers or boost our social standing or provide any tangible benefit to our lives. The invisible ones, The people society has decided don't matter. That's where you see someone's soul without the makeup and performance and careful presentation. Sienna didn't need a billionaire to rescue her like some damsel in a tower waiting for a prince. She needed the world to stop treating her like she was invisible, like she was less than human, like her circumstances defined her worth as a person. And when Donovan gave her that, when he offered her respect and recognition and a chance to prove what she'd always known about herself, she didn't just survive, she thrived. She transformed hundreds of lives because someone finally gave her the tools and the platform to do what she'd always had the heart to do. The lesson isn't about money, it's about sight, it's about vision, it's about who you see when you walk past someone struggling. Do you see a human being with a story and dreams and people they've loved and lost? Or do you see trash to shove aside, an obstacle cluttering up your aesthetic, a reminder of failure that makes you uncomfortable? Victoria saw trash. Donovan saw a person. And that one choice, that single moment of decision changed everything. It saved him from a loveless marriage to a con artist. It saved Sienna from a life of invisibility. It saved hundreds of other people who benefited from the foundation she built. One choice rippling outward like a stone thrown into still water, creating waves that touch shores you can't even see from where you're standing. Sienna says it best, and she says it often when she speaks at shelters and community centers and anywhere people will listen. I didn't need rescuing. I just needed respect. I needed someone to see me as human when the world had decided I wasn't. That's all most people need, not charity that comes with judgment. Not pity that makes the giver feel superior, just basic human respect, just being seen. So here's the question that should keep you up at night. Who have you been walking past? Who have you been treating as invisible? Who have you dismissed because their circumstances made you uncomfortable? Or their appearance didn't match your standards, or their struggle reminded you that safety is always temporary. Because character isn't revealed in boardrooms where everyone's watching. It's not revealed in bank accounts or on social media where you can curate your image and control the narrative. It's revealed in the rain, on cold pavement, when someone is watching who you think doesn't matter. When you believe nobody will know or care what you do. That's when you find out who you really are underneath all the performances and presentations. If this story touched your heart, if it made you think differently about the people you pass on the street, or the way you treat service workers, or the worth of someone whose life looks nothing like yours, then please hit that subscribe button, drop a like, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and leave your thoughts in the comments below because I read every single one. I want to know your story. I want to know who you've been ignoring and why. I want to know if you've ever been invisible and what brought you back. Because your story matters too. Every story matters. Every life has value. And maybe if we all start seeing each other the way Donovan learned to see Sienna, the way his mother tried to teach him, this world might become a little less cruel, a little more human, a little more like the place we all wish we lived in instead of the place we've created through a million small acts of looking away.